Mark Thompson had always dreamed of having a quiet life away from noise and city stress. For years, he worked hard in his small construction business, fixing other people's homes and saving every dollar he could. He often told his daughter, Lily, that one day they would have their own place near a lake where they could fish, paint, and watch the sunset together. That dream finally came true when he bought an old cabin near Silver Lake, a calm and beautiful place surrounded by pine trees and blue water. The cabin was old but strong, and to Mark, it felt like a second chance at peace. When he and Lily arrived one weekend, Mark decided to give the cabin a new look. The old brown paint was peeling, so he picked a calm blue color that matched the sky and the lake. Lily helped him with a small brush, laughing as she painted the wooden edges. They played music, cooked lunch on the porch, and enjoyed the quiet. Mark didn't know that just across the road lived Karen Miller, the head of the neighborhood HOA, known by many locals as someone who loved rules more than kindness. The next morning, Mark was cleaning his brushes when he saw a woman walking toward his cabin with a clipboard in hand. She wore dark glasses, a perfect outfit, and a face that looked like it hadn't smiled in years. "Good morning," Mark said politely. She didn't return the smile. Instead, she said, "I'm Karen, president of the HOA. You're in violation of our color standards." Mark looked confused. "I'm sorry, what do you mean?" She pointed at his house. "Cabins here must be in neutral tones. Beige, brown, or light gray. Blue is not allowed." Mark explained that he had checked the HOA booklet left by the previous owner and saw no rule about paint color. But Karen just said, "Rules change when I say they do," and handed him a paper with a fine. Then she walked away, heels clicking loudly on the gravel. Mark sighed but didn't argue. He didn't want trouble. He just wanted peace. He folded the fine and placed it inside a drawer, thinking maybe she was just having a bad day. However, that was only the beginning. A week later, Mark received another fine, this time because his small fishing boat was tied near the dock instead of inside the storage area. Then came another fine because his daughter had drawn chalk hearts and flowers on the walkway. Mark laughed at first, thinking it was a mistake. But the letters kept coming, each one with Corinne's name at the bottom. It was clear she wasn't going to stop. Still, Mark didn't lose his calm. He spent his mornings fixing the cabin roof and teaching Lily how to fish. They built a small fire pit, roasted marshmallows, and laughed about everything. For Mark, those small moments mattered more than silly fines. But Corinne didn't see it that way. Every day, she drove around in her small golf cart, taking pictures of other people's yards, looking for new violations. She loved control more than community. Then one morning, everything took a strange turn. Mark was repairing the porch railing when he heard sirens. 2 police cars stopped near his cabin. Karen stood behind them, arms crossed, wearing a proud smile. Mark came down the steps, wiping his hands. "Good morning, officers," he said calmly. One of them asked, "Are you Mr. Thompson?" Mark nodded. "We got a report about multiple HOA violations and a possible disturbance." Karen stepped forward quickly. "He's breaking several neighborhood laws. He refuses to follow color codes, keeps his boat out, and disrespects our property values." She shouted. The officers exchanged confused looks. They saw nothing wrong, just a man fixing his porch and a little girl drawing flowers on the steps. Mark stayed quiet. He didn't argue or raise his voice. When one officer asked for his ID, Mark reached for his wallet and handed it over. The officer's eyes paused on something, his concealed carry badge from his work in security. The officer's expression changed. He looked at Mark with respect and gave a small salute. "Sir, you're good here." "Sorry to bother you," he said politely. Then he turned to Karen and added, "Ma'am, this isn't a police matter." Please don't use emergency services for personal issues. Karen's face lost all color. She stammered, but he... The officer shook his head. He's done nothing wrong. Have a good day, sir. Mark thanked them kindly, nodded, and watched as they left. Karen stood frozen, angry and embarrassed. Mark didn't say a word to her. He simply went back to work, quietly humming a tune while Lily painted a heart on the step. But that day, something inside Mark changed. He realized this wasn't just about paint or rules. Karen was using her position to bully people. He heard from other neighbors that she had fined them too, for small things like leaving a bike outside or hanging wind chimes. People were scared to speak up. Mark decided he wasn't going to live like that. That evening, after Lily went to bed, he opened his laptop and started reading through the HOA's bylaws and meeting records. He found public files showing how the HOA handled its money and decisions. The more he read, the stranger things looked. There were charges for office improvements that didn't exist, missing signatures, and spending that didn't make sense. Karen's name was everywhere in the documents. Night after night, Mark studied quietly, taking notes, highlighting lines, and making copies. He wasn't planning to fight her with anger. He was planning to fight her with facts. His calm nature hid his smart mind. He talked to a few neighbors and discovered that many wanted change, but didn't know how. The HOA had become like a small kingdom ruled by one person. As the next HOA meeting date approached, Mark made a plan. He found out that ownership of multiple lake properties gave voting power in the HOA. So he started buying small, rundown properties, nearby ones nobody cared about. He fixed them just enough to transfer ownership legally. In doing so, he earned more voting rights. Slowly, quietly, without raising attention, he built influence within the community. Karen, unaware of all this, continued her routine. She kept sending letters and taking pictures, proudly believing she had won. But Mark didn't react. He greeted her politely every time she passed by, which made her even angrier. She thought she had scared him into silence, but in truth, he was preparing something bigger, something that would change the whole neighborhood. 3 weeks later, when the meeting day was finally announced, Mark placed all his papers neatly into a folder. He looked around his cabin, now shining under the sunlight with its bright blue paint. Lily's drawings decorated the porch. The lake glimmered like silver glass, peaceful and calm. He smiled to himself. He had come here for peace, and he was about to win it back, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been afraid of speaking up. The man who once wanted a quiet cabin by the lake was now ready to stand up for fairness. Karen had no idea her days of power were numbered, and the next meeting would change everything for good. As the evening fell, Mark sat by the dock, watching the orange sky reflect on the water. Lily ran up beside him, holding her little paintbrush, her cheeks full of color. "Daddy," she said softly, "is the lady going to stop being mean?" Mark smiled and patted her head. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people need to learn that being kind is stronger than being in charge." He didn't know how the meeting would unfold, but he was calm. For the first time since moving in, he wasn't nervous or upset. He was ready. He knew that the truth was on his side, and that soon, the lake would finally be peaceful again. The water rippled gently. The cabin stood proud in its new color. And the man who only wanted to live quietly had found a new purpose: to make things right. The evening of the HO meeting finally arrived. The community hall by the lake was filled with neighbors, most of them tired of all the fines and rules that had taken away their peace. Karen Miller stood proudly at the front table, dressed sharply as if she were the mayor of a city. She smiled confidently, thinking she still had full control over everyone. She didn't know that tonight would change everything. Mark walked in quietly, wearing his clean work shirt and holding a folder under his arm. He greeted people kindly as he passed. Many nodded back, whispering to one another. They all respected him for staying calm, even when Karen tried to humiliate him. Karen tapped her gavel and started speaking loudly. "Order! Let's begin the meeting. I want to remind everyone that HOA rules are made for the good of our community. Anyone who disrespects them is disrespecting all of us." She glared at Mark for a second, then continued reading her papers. Mark sat in the front row, his hands folded on the table. When Karen asked if there were any topics from the residents, he slowly raised his hand. "Yes, I have something to discuss," he said calmly. Karen rolled her eyes. "You're not on the board. You can't speak here," she said quickly. Mark smiled a little. "Actually, I am now." The room went silent. People looked at each other, confused. Karen blinked. "What are you talking about?" Mark stood up and opened his folder. Inside were property deeds official papers signed and stamped. "Over the last few weeks, I purchased several cabins and lots in this community," he explained. "According to the HOA rules, each property gives voting rights. That means I now have the largest number of votes." Karen's face froze. "That's impossible." "It's legal," Mark replied simply. "And I'd like to use those votes to make a proposal of leadership change." For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then people started whispering, nodding, and clapping quietly. Most of them had been waiting for someone brave enough to stand up to Karen. A few residents raised their hands to support Mark's motion. One man said loudly, "About time someone did this." Another added, "We're tired of being fined for living our lives." Karen slammed her hand on the table. "This is ridiculous. I've led this HOA for 10 years. You can't just walk in here and take over." Mark didn't argue. He spoke gently. "You've done your part, but the community deserves fairness. We all moved here to enjoy the lake, not to live in fear of letters and fines. I think everyone here wants peace, not control." People began raising their hands one by one, voting for change. When the count was done, almost every hand in the room was lifted in favor of Mark. Only Corinne's hand stayed down. Her voice trembled with anger, but no one listened this time. The final decision was made. Mark Thompson was the new HOA president. Karen stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. But the people stayed, smiling and shaking Mark's hand. For the first time in years, they felt free. The meeting ended with laughter, and many neighbors gathered outside, talking about new plans for the community. Mark didn't gloat or brag. He just thanked everyone and promised to make things fair and simple again. In the following weeks, he worked hard. He met with the board, reviewed all the finances, and opened the HOA's books for everyone to see. What he found shocked everyone: extra charges, missing funds, and payments that didn't belong. Mark returned the extra money to the residents, explaining everything clearly. For the first time, people trusted the HOA again. They began to believe that it could actually help, not harm. Mark also started small improvements around the lake. He helped fix the broken dock, arranged for better lighting near the pathways, and organized a community picnic. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in years started talking again. Kids played outside without fear of being fined for their toys. Lily drew bright chalk art on the sidewalk again, and this time, everyone smiled at it. Karen, however, didn't give up easily. She sent angry letters to the board, demanding to be reinstated. She complained that Mark had embarrassed her. But she also stopped paying her own HO and dues and broke several community rules herself, things she once punished others for. Mark didn't react with anger. He followed the same rule book she had used for years. The board sent her gentle notices first, just like she had done to others. When she ignored them, the board took a vote. It was a difficult decision, but the community agreed. By majority vote, Karen lost her membership and had to leave the neighborhood. The morning she moved out was quiet. A few neighbors stood at their doors, watching as movers loaded her boxes into a truck. Karen kept her eyes down and didn't speak to anyone. Mark stood by his porch with a calm expression. He didn't smile, and he didn't gloat. When her car passed his house, he just gave a small nod. She didn't look back. After she left, the community felt lighter, almost like a cloud had lifted. People began repainting their homes in cheerful colors. One cabin turned yellow, another soft green, and Mark's remained the same peaceful blue. The lake sparkled brighter than ever. On weekends, families gathered for picnics, music, and games. The sound of laughter replaced the sound of complaints. The HOA no longer felt like a set of rules. It felt like a family. Mark's daughter, Lily, painted a mural on the old HOA office wall. It showed the lake, trees, and happy families fishing and smiling. At the bottom, she wrote in big, colorful letters, "Kindness wins." The whole community loved it. People said it reminded them why they had moved there, to live peacefully, not under pressure. A few months later, a local newspaper wrote an article about how Mark had turned a strict, unhappy HOA into one of the most friendly lake communities in the state. Reporters visited to see the place for themselves. They met residents who proudly shared how life had changed. Some even said they started gardening or hosting potlucks again because they finally felt free. The story spread, and people from other towns came to see how a small act of courage and fairness could bring back harmony. One evening, as the sun went down, Mark sat on his porch with Lily beside him. She was drawing again, her little hands covered in color. The lake reflected gold and pink light. The air was calm. Lily looked up and said, "Daddy, it's so quiet now." "No one yells anymore." Mark smiled gently and replied, "That's what happens when people choose kindness over power." He thought about everything that had happened, the fines, the police visit, the meeting, and how it all led to this peaceful moment. He didn't feel proud for winning. He felt thankful for the lesson. Sometimes doing the right thing meant standing up quietly, without shouting or fighting. As stars began to appear in the sky, a few neighbors walked by and waved. "Evening, Mark," they called. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" He waved back with a warm smile. "Sure is," he replied. He looked at his cabin, shining under the moonlight, and felt at peace. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was proof that calm strength could change an entire community. The story of Silver Lake became a local legend, told to new families who moved there. They heard how a quiet man bought a cabin, faced unfair treatment, and changed everything without anger or hate. They learned how one person's fairness could defeat years of control. Every summer, new families arrived, and Mark welcomed them with a smile and a handshake. There were no fines, no threats, only friendly rules and open hearts. The sound of laughter filled the air again, just like the first day he had arrived. And sometimes, when he walked by the mural his daughter painted, he would stop and look at the words, "Kindness wins." He'd smile to himself, knowing it wasn't just a slogan. It was the truth he had lived and proved. In the end, Mark hadn't just painted a cabin. He had painted peace, hope, and kindness across a whole community. And as the waves of the lake gently touched the shore, it felt as if even nature itself was proud of him.